With a penchant for snow forts, and sniping oblivious players with a well-thrown snowball, this dragon is a curiosity for sure. With this dragon's spirit closely tied to the positive energy plane, this video is bound to be unique compared to the others in this series. So, without further introduction, today's TPK or bust features the adult crystal dragon. In terms of offense, you're looking at a dragon that has some different options compared to its gym kin. The first ability for its offensive skills that I want to discuss is the breath attack, and unlike other dragons, this one works in two different functions. The first is the damage. With its 60-foot cone of radiant, it's a very uncommon damage type for many dragons, dealing a pretty low average damage of 40 on a DC 17 Constitution saving throw. It's not that impressive, but where it gets interesting is the secondary effect, which is that the Crystal Dragon actually gains 15 temporary HP every time it uses the breath attack. For an offensive skill, I think it's pretty alright. It's able to sponge damage and deal damage in the same way. It's able to stay in a fight longer and maybe even take greater risks to take out threats early. Although I am sad that the breath attack does not blind its targets on a failed saving throw. I feel like it should with how little damage it's doing and how little temporary HP it's getting compared to its total, given that the lower of the breath attack is literally blinding to anybody hit by it. For the Claw-Claw-Bite combo, it's kind of falling behind on damage once again, with a total average of 38 damage on all 3 hits. Keep in mind that even though it is a 12 CR creature, its overall damage compared to other 12 CR creatures is very low. Or at least, that's what I thought up until I read its legendary actions. It has one ability that has insane burst damage potential, just as powerful as its breath attack. For 3 legendary actions, it can perform a Starlight Strike. Targeting a single creature close by, it slams them for 31 points of radiant, unless they make a DC 17 dexterity saving throw. This is an all-or-none legendary action. It has very high damage, and it got me thinking about how often in a fight this dragon would be willing to do this. For context, its other 2 legendary actions are very standard. For one legendary action, it can perform a claw attack, dealing minor damage. This legendary action is just fine, it's not super good, because remember, its claw attacks actually don't do that much damage. For 2 legendary actions, though, it can either teleport up to 60 feet, or perform one of its many spells, which later is covered in the skills segment, but for context early, its spells are pretty good. What needs to be clarified is why it would ever choose a spell and a puny claw attack over the potential 31 damage it's going to be dealing every round. While it is all or nothing, I really think it's up to you when running this dragon to decide on what the target priority is looking like. Whether or not you need to spend the legendary actions to do something to move away with the teleport, or maybe perform a claw attack early. Whatever you think is necessary is fine, but if you need like a fighter off of your scales ASAP, this ability would be your option. If you're dealing with pesky spellcasters and rangers or rogues in the backline, I would just recommend teleporting out of line of sight rather than risking wasting all of your legendary actions to maybe try to burst somebody who's more than likely going to succeed and not take any. Just thinking about its ability to stay a bit longer in the fight with those temporary HPs, its ability to teleport every turn if it's not doing this burst damage, and overall forcing parties to make a few different kinds of saving throws versus every effect it's giving, those being Constitution, Dexterity, and Wisdom. It's a hard dragon to assess when you take into perspective the Claw-Claw-Bite combo doesn't actually do that much damage, and that's its most reliable source of damage. If it wasn't so reliant on the legendary action or even the breath attack to actually deal damage to enemies, I could easily rate it higher. But when taking a small step back and thinking about all of its damage, all of its options, and its overall power, I think a 5 out of 10 for offense is fair. Now, technically it might be a cop-out to settle right at the middle, but I believe this dragon is just that, in the middle. It's a medium threat in terms of offense. Moving right along to skills, we can talk about those spells I mentioned before, and they are just as flavorful as I could have hoped. At will, it gets things like dancing lights and guidance, which neither really help it inside of combat that much, but both are very great aesthetically outside of combat to help it succeed in conversations or puzzles or even perception checks. However, its once-a-day abilities of Command, Divination, Hypnotic Pattern, and Lesser Restoration make for a different conversation. First up is Hypnotic Pattern, which if used correctly on something like the Rogue, the Wizard, or Barbarians, this could easily incapacitate and charm at the same time. It's a deadly spell for sure in the claws of this creature, because again, its spellcasting for 2 legendary actions means that in between the turns, it can use this either offensively to skip a player's turn or multiple players' turns, or defensively to force players away from a specific zone. Either way, its shape and saving throw make it a prime choice for a spell, but with the limit at once a day, I'm left wanting a little bit more. For things like Lesser Restoration, it's not irrelevant in combat, but with its overall buffer against magical effects by being a dragon, I think it's more effective to risk the saving throw or spend the legendary resistance on pesky effects rather than spend the action or legendary actions to cleanse the effect with the spell. Divination inside of combat isn't a terrible option. Honestly, it's up in the air how meta you want to get with it, but the first thing that comes to mind is intent. What is the dragon using this for, and why is it spending its action economy to do so? I can say that discovering relevant information might be worth the investment early, but this isn't always the best move. Lastly is the spell Command, which is a classic CC effect. With a Wisdom saving throw versus DC 16, hitting it reliably on a target of high value is pretty hit or miss, but with it having only one of these in the chamber, it could easily turn the tide of battle with a well-placed halt or gravel on a target not expecting it to have this kind of spell. Its stats, though, are a different story, because with a CR 12, this dragon is rocking some really impressive stats. You're looking at a 21 strength, 12 dexterity, 21 constitution, 18 intelligence, 15 wisdom, 19 charisma. The first thing here is that it doesn't have a 10 dexterity, which makes me so happy to see, and its intelligence and charisma being so high is a wonderful bonus to boot. I can easily see the Crystal Dragon being able to perform complex and unheard of plans, both tactically and socially. I find that in combat, when one side is losing, a very classic, cutscene where the parties pull away from the combat and talk for a couple seconds, and then go back into combat if it doesn't work out, is a fun trope. I feel like this dragon specifically, while kind-hearted and sweet, would definitely do this as often as possible. I'll do a more in-depth personality assessment in the flavor section, but mentioning it early will help with the context moving forward. For its other skills, you're looking at the usual dragon skills of plus 10 perception, plus 9 stealth, and plus 6 survival. Its skill in survival makes a lot of sense given the biome it chooses, that of snowy places and mountains. Last up is those lair actions. Like many of the other gym dragons, the first on this list is the ability to charm targets within 120 feet of itself. This is useful inside and outside of combat to avoid a fight and to keep players from fighting in the middle of combat. The second lair action allows the Crystal Dragon to open giant door-like holes in the ice around its lair. Although technically it can't close these doors with this ability, I think it's a alright ability for an escape route, or even just a distraction. I can't think of another reason to use this ability. I'm just drawing a blank here. Let me know in the comments if you can find another use for this. It's a very specific ability, and I just don't see a lot of options. The last layer action is very similar to Fairy Fire, where the dragon targets a spot within sight and makes a 10-foot sphere. Targets within the radius make a dexterity saving throw versus DC 15, taking 13 damage on average on a fail, and being outlined in a glow, making attacks against that target strike with advantage until the top of the initiative round at initiative count 20. This layer action is very good, although I wish the dex save was that of the DC 16, that is, its spell save, but overall the chip damage alongside the advantage makes its weak melee attacks a bit more reliable, with the added bonus of the extra critical hit chance. Its movements are very traditional, with a fly speed of 80, a walk of 40, and a very classy burrow of 40. The burrow can come in handy, and I would mark that and use it as often as possible with that 18 intelligence. Make pitfall traps or tunnels. Do something with it specifically, but I'm not going to cover that here. Overall, for skills, I was very, very impressed with the Crystal Dragon. It gets very good spells, very good stats, and some solid layer actions that are useful in and out of combat. So with all of that said, I believe an 8.6 out of 10 for skills is more than fair. I would be prone to agree that technically, its skills are a bit clunky inside of combat. Its relevant layer action DC is low. The once-a-day spells are powerful, sure, but short-lived. However, with these spells being relevant, and the fact that it has them at all, it's a very good action economy, including that it has not one, but 2 bonus action choices. And lastly, the healthy stat distribution overcomes these problems to make them far less prominent. However, for defenses, there is a glaring problem with this creature, and that is its AC. Sitting at a pitiful 16, I'm thinking this dragon is made from talc or gypsum rather than anything else. Like a 16, come on, even dragons with lower CR, like that of the Deep Dragon, have better AC. This compounded with its HP being at an average of 172, makes this dragon frail and squishy. A terrible combination. Even though it does have resistance to cold and radiance, this blessing is not that great. Yes, you get resistance to spells like Ice Knife and Cone of Cold. You get resistance to effects like Divine Smite and other radiant-based damage sources, but I just don't see this being as relevant when its AC is so low. With standard saving throw bonuses like +5 Dexterity, +9 Constitution, +6 Wisdom, and +8 Charisma, it can resist important effects and damages, and that's really thanks to its great stats and draconic bloodline. Look, I want to be fair to this dragon, so I'll quickly talk about the best defensive trait I see on this dragon, and that trait isn't so clear-cut like those dazzling scales. This trait being its personality. Now, I'm coming in a little early for this, but when I go into details later, you will fully understand what I mean. By avoiding combat entirely, and being a big ol' sweetheart, its most common fights might boil down to protecting those around it from a destructive force, and maybe snowball fights with adventurers it finds interesting or amusing. Without that one trait, I would have really had to tear into the poor Crystal Dragon. With that horrible AC and low HP pool, and just alright resistances and no immunities, it would have been lights out. But all that said, I think a defensive score of 3.0 out of 10 is harsh. But in the grand scale of everything, it's gonna have to be what it is. I am aware that its breath attack grants it some temporary HP, but on an average of 2 to 3 turns for waiting on the breath attack, it just is not going to matter that much in the long run. With it so easy to hit, even with blessings of temporary HP, it is still extraordinarily weak to burst damage options, especially those like Fireball, which require it to make a dex save. And yes, it does have a 12 dexterity, but when you look at it, it only has a +5 to that saving throw. And even if you do succeed on the saving throw, you're still looking at 14 points of average damage if you succeed, and 28 if you fail. And both of those are all of your temporary HP or double. On this same topic, I need to mention its intelligence all over again. The reason it's going to get a higher score than the Brass Dragon in the defensive category is only because its massive intelligence might allow it to settle priority on targets and swap battle plans quickly. It may be able to optimize all of its options every single turn. Even if it can't make up fully for its squishy crystal body, it would be able to assess whether or not it would win or lose that fight very, very quickly, maybe in the first round or so. Last up is the flavor of the Crystal Dragon, which, as mentioned earlier, its personality is something unique. It's kind-hearted and overall gentle, albeit a bit shy at first. It's willing to be silly and make mischief. It's known to take other dragons' eggs that are abandoned or lost and raise them as its own. And that brings me full circle to my point here. It's a kind soul. It's a combatant only through necessity. Heck, even its diets of metals and gems means it never has to hunt. And I'm not saying it can't just fight outright. I mean, earlier I discussed how easily it can make battle plans and outwit many opponents. And with its magical skills and unique breath attack, it can stay within a fight a little longer than normal at first glance. But caught off guard by a sneak attack, this dragon would crumble like glass very quickly. Its design of skills makes me really like the dragon overall. Even if I have something against its art in Fizbans' Treasury of Dragons, it just looks so goofy, by the way. I just can't get over it. Like, why make it so goofy looking? It looks so goofy. So goofy. I want to talk about this dragon more. I think I've gabbed about it long enough for everyone watching, though. So, for flavor, I'm going to give the Crystal Dragon a solid 6.3 out of 10, and that's mostly around its personality and overall unique design. I don't believe it's going to be an easy dragon to pick a fight with. It's hard to rate it for its combat skills alone in this type of video, but I think it's a very useful niche of a dragon, and a rare one for sure. Finally, we reach the end, and I think with a total score of 5.7 out of 10, landing it at the summits of the basic brawl group, I think this dragon could have easily been a much more dangerous foe if you give it the right motivation and +1 AC. If not for the constant nagging of its 16 AC, a penalty here and there for an effect, or even a clunky interaction, I would have rated this dragon a bit higher. But if you're looking for a good story hook, this dragon is definitely a good one to use. Its personality is so fun and sweet. It is a perfect way to give your players information or an ally against the forces of evil. Not to mention, with its habit of picking up stray dragons, you can have fun with it raising something like a very naughty or mischievous dragon who can't get over their want of treasure and chaos. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate the support, and tune in again for the next video on the TPK or Bust series, where I'll be talking about the one, the only, Deep Dragon.